Welcome to our conference session. Is it 1:30? Yes. So here we are going to talk about this hashtag, or these hashtags, Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. Unpacking the complexities of the cases with Mike Brown, Eric Garner, and Tamir Rice. I am Dr. Deshonna Collier Gubil, and
I'm Asnat Gabermedin.
We're going to be your presenters today. Okay, so just so that you have an idea of how we're going to move, how we're going to flow today, this is our agenda. Asnat and I will introduce ourselves and give a little bit of information about ourselves and our interest in the topic. Then we're going to kind of set the stage for the dialogue that we're hoping to have today. We'll talk a little bit about Evangelicals for Justice, law enforcement versus Black Lives Matter. Largely, we want to have Q&A with you guys, okay? So we've reserved a lot of time for that, so we want you to have an opportunity to ask those questions that you've been wanting to ask, anything that you want to ask. We will try our best to answer. If we don't know the answer, we'll say, I don't know. But we're hoping to open up some good dialogue today. And then we're going to end with Christian responses to the movement. Oftentimes I have students that ask me, what can I do? What should I do? How can I get involved? You know, et cetera. So we'll kind of talk about that at the end. Is that good to go? Okay. All right, so starting with introductions. I am, again, Dr. Deshonna Collier Gubil. Here, students refer to me as Dr. Collier. Totally okay if you refer to me that way. Interest in the subject matter. So my background is that I am a faculty member here at Biola University. I've been teaching here for 4 years. I teach sociology and mostly criminal justice classes. So I spend my time researching race injustice, gender injustice, the criminal justice system, criminal justice in California, all that kind of stuff. So these cases are like right in my wheelhouse as it relates to that. Personal experience addressing this issue at a Christian college. So, yes, yeah. Sometimes it's just in the yeah, huh? Okay. Yes. So I work here at Biola University. And so for me to be honest, I was a little saddened that the very initial response or reaction that I saw to what was going on in the world was led by students. So that, not that I'm not proud of students, I'm very proud of you all standing up and doing things. You know, yeah. So I did realize then that I needed to get involved, but I had to gauge my involvement. So I'm just going to be honest, I was personally impacted at the time. And so I lost my ability to really be even keel. And so because of that, I kind of felt like, okay, I have to gauge. I'm very intentional with my students about wanting them to come to their own conclusions and not necessarily just follow mine. And so I had to step back a little bit when this first all broke. And then eventually, it was maybe a couple weeks later, I was very happy and pleased that a couple of my colleagues, other faculty here at Biola, organized some events, and so I came and I participated in those events. So those were prayer vigils, and then there was a panel discussion where I sat on the panel, and at the time, that was the best that I could do. Okay, so this is, I guess, my first time publicly talking about this issue, but I'm good now, so I'm ready to go. All right, Asnat.
Okay, it's Dr. Collier. My name is Asnat Gabermedin. I'm a sociology student here at Biola, and so Dr. Collier has been my professor. I'm a senior, it's my 4th year, and minoring in international development. So my interest in the subject, as sociology, was to talk about contexts and situations, but also I have an older brother, and he's a black male living in the U.S., and so topics are interesting to me because I can see my brother in different cases. And so personal experience here at Biola, when the news broke out, the first of the non-indictment of the officer who shot Michael Brown, I feel like people remember like where you were at different events, and especially during this event, I was in the gym like probably the first time in the semester, but it was like end of, like during finals week, and you're like trying to relieve stress, and it's like the one place on campus where we have cable television, and so the news is gonna be announced, and there's like this delay of time, and I remember just like sitting there, just like really scared, like what's gonna happen, and just kind of like as news was breaking out, and as the news broke, just being in like so much grief and disbelief, like this is the U.S., this is today, and I remember people in the gym around me like not really just like paying attention, but when the news broke out, they like watched and then like walked away, and I was like, what? Like I'm like in tears, and like I don't know, I was really shocked to see that reaction. Until that night, I organized students to get together to get together for the morning to do like a prayer or something. I felt like something needed to happen. We need to be together as a community. And so that the next day, several students, staff, and faculty, and even our president of the university showed up, and we prayed, just for different aspects for the families and for just, injustice. And which led to 2 more events. And then the third one was where faculty and staff came and like led that one. And there were events that unfolded from there, kind of disappointing events where we had signs put up, various signs, and they were actually stolen 3 times. And so, we'll go into this later, but that's my personal experience with this topic.
Yeah, and so any of the things that we, this is a great time for me to jump in and introduce our little Q&A format. So I know my students. I love my students. I know you guys like to be anonymous when you ask questions. So the format that we're going to use today is that we have some note cards. Some volunteers in the room have some note cards that they're going to pass out. Can you guys pass them out? Yeah. And this way you can write down any question that you want. So Osnat and I are going to talk for a little bit to give you some time to kind of think and come up with some questions. Write down anything that you want, any question you might want to ask either of us from anything that we say or anything in general. And then we'll hold that at the end. But that way we're hoping to get some honest dialogue going on. All right. So today's dialogue.
Cool. Okay, so today's dialogue, you guys saw the title, Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter. And just to unpack that a little bit. So the hashtag went Black Lives Matter. That formed from questions of like, do Black Lives Matter? These questions were legitimate, and because we've seen hundreds of cases and where Black people were killed or gunned down, and there are like no consequences, or there was this like in non-indictment cases, there's decisions that there shouldn't be time put in to figure out whether it's worthy of time, and with those results, we see people who don't care that it's not cared about, and people who are okay and can justify the fact that these cases need no time, and especially from the Christian community. So when we say Black Lives Matter, it's not that we don't think all lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. But we need to address, do Black Lives Matter, and state like, do we believe this? And if so, our actions need to reflect that.
Okay. We have a couple seats on this side, a couple seats over here. If you guys want to move on in, you can. Feel free, grab a seat. Get all cozy. All right. So we're going to take a macro approach to this discussion, and this is just helping to frame and set the stage for you. We're not going to go into minute details about the case of each gentleman who being discussed. We kind of felt like that's information that you can Google. So I like to be efficient. My students are efficient, so I like to match that and be efficient with them. I don't want to repeat information that you can Google. So we're going to kind of take a macro approach to why this is even important and how this became important. So in addition to that, not wanting to make you guys talk about things that you can Google, it's also, this is a social phenomenon that happens so often that talking about just 3 people really wouldn't do it justice. So Can I show you? Yeah, you can. One more time. Here are the names, just to give you an idea. Here are the names of individuals who lost their lives due to police brutality in the year 2014. These are people of color. So you can see that taking the time to go into great detail about 3 people loses a lot of people. Okay, so that's the reason why we're going to take a macro approach today. Also, I want to point out this alarming issue that oftentimes when we talk about it and we take the time to simply focus on 3 individuals, there is a gendered nuance that is occurring. We are focusing on the lives of 3 men as if these same instances don't happen to Black women and other women of color. Okay, so I just want to throw that out there. See, my students know I do this a lot. I like to throw stuff out there, drop it in the middle of the room, and I'm just gonna leave it there and walk away. But think about that. And when we talk about it, we're always talking about men. Okay. All right, so Evangelicals for Justice. This is a cool hashtag. So during this time when everything was going on in Ferguson and the protests and all around the country and all around the world, this hashtag became, I'm not sure how, well, it became important to me. I'm not sure if you guys knew about it or not. But Evangelicals for Justice is a cool hashtag that you can search on Twitter if you want to see what the dialogue has been in that environment. But evangelicals have found themselves on many different sides of the issue. So it's not just a clear cut, we should do this, or we should go this way, or we should go that way. You have people who feel they want to support the Jesus justice model, that Jesus was about justice, Jesus cared about the oppressed, and so we need to fight for justice, and Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, okay? Then you have other people, love thy neighbor. So even if I don't see it as a justice issue, I should see these people as my neighbor, and I should be able to love my neighbor as I love myself. And how would I feel if it were me, or how would I feel, and try to put themselves in that regard, environment. Then you have people that are angry, righteous. They have righteous indignation that the loss of life in any way deserves our attention. It deserves our dialogue. It deserves us caring about in some way. Then you have some evangelicals that are against the movement. So these people feel that we shouldn't get involved in politics at all. So we shouldn't get involved in politics at all. We should always stand with our government. Many people feel like this is a social movement that is against law enforcement officers, and that law enforcement officers are heroes, and so we shouldn't do anything or say anything that goes in the face of them being, of them, the duty that they provide to us.
And we also have a third group of evangelicals, and this is the silence, which seems to be a majority of Christians. And the questions they were asking was that they were saying we don't have a model, or what should young people follow? We don't really have anything, we don't know how to respond, or even if we should respond. But at the same time, silence is compliance. And if you think about those who are being hurt or marginalized, as a body of Christ, ignoring a wound is the same as kind of inflicting it, that you're just letting it keep on hurting. And that's what the silent evangelicals represent.
Okay, so law enforcement versus Black Lives Matter. Because there's this big, this is against law enforcement officers, and how can you do this when they do so much, they give so much for us? And I love officers, so let me let you know that. I love teaching people who want to become officers, so I'm not against law enforcement in any way or capacity. There is a checkered history between marginalized groups and law enforcement. So most people don't know that the history of policing is that our first law enforcement officers in the US were in place to keep marginalized groups relegated to certain areas. Okay, so many of the laws, many of the ways that certain people groups have been policed historically represent that. Okay, so people have different experiences with law enforcement officers. Some people experience law enforcement officers as protecting and serving. Some people experience law enforcement officers as them hunting them. Okay. There is overt racial bias. There is implicit bias as well in law enforcement. We just recently had the FBI director, I think just about a week ago, who released a statement acknowledging that implicit bias does exist in policing, that there are officers who have implicit bias. I don't want to ignore the fact that some people are biased on purpose. So there's also overt racial bias. Historically, there has been a relationship between members of hate groups, basically, and policing. So many police officers police in the daytime and then were members of hate groups at night. So did I say every? No. But many. Historically, that's just the facts. So that does exist. And it would be very difficult for a person to separate that type of experience from their day job when they're policing someone. Okay, that's just reality. In the movement, I think that the message has been lost, the real message of the movement. I like social movements, so I usually read lots of things about them and why they are and how they are and et cetera. So you always have peaceful, nonviolent protesters. You always have some people who don't necessarily want to be peaceful, but also are protesting. Then you have opportunists. So opportunists are people who just, hey, I just want to steal some things. This looks like a good reason for me to do it, so let me go ahead and do it, okay? I think that in addition to those three, you have the media spreading propaganda. So the media is based on consumers the same way Pepsi or Coke is, right? Okay, so the media is trying to feed their audience. They want to sell something that's sensational. If they were to show you 5 hours of some peaceful protesters standing or just laying on the ground, how likely is it that that would get a hashtag or any views on social media? Not very likely, right? You wouldn't spend your time sitting there watching the screen for 3 hours of some people just laying on the ground, right? Okay, so then the media wants to show you what's sensational. They want to get the most exciting, eye-catching, eye-grabbing content to pull you in, to watch their channel, to go to their website, to share their page, to give them a hashtag, et cetera, right? Okay, because I think oftentimes when I've spoken to students, I felt like, and not just students, but people in general, people feel like, well, there's a lot of people stealing things, and there's a lot of looting, and there's a lot of, putting cop cars on fire and fighting the police officers. And I'm like, yeah, it could have been 8 hours of peaceful protesting, 15 minutes of somebody acting a fool, and that's what made the news. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. What the protesters have been asking for, there are organized protesters, so this is not like chaos and people being organized protesters with an agenda. And what they're basically asking for is accountability. At the present moment, I can't tell you, because sometimes the question or the statement that people make to me is, well, black people are killed by law enforcement officers, but so are white people, so are Latino people, so are Asian people. So, why should I care? Well, here's the thing. I have no way to tell you what percentage of what is happening to who. You know why? We currently don't collect any data on that. There is no reporting body where law enforcement agency has to report, I had an incident with this individual and they died. So there's no way for anyone to know. So the protesters are saying we want a system of accountability. We want some type of agency or body that will collect data on that information. They're calling for more community policing, as opposed to this us against them mentality that seems to be prevalent in law enforcement. Community policing is when law enforcement officers get out their cars and walk around the community. They know the people, they get to know the people, they understand the children and how the children are and how the parents are, and they know people by name, they know all the store owners, etc. Because it's different. You have a different relationship to policing an individual when you know their name. Okay? You're no longer able to look and point the finger and say them, or that person, or that thing, or it. You have to think of it in terms of, that's Deshaun, I was just throwing a ball with him yesterday. That's Tanisha, we hung out. I bought her an ice cream cone. Okay, that's community policing. They want their cameras. Now, there's a little controversy. Some people want cameras, some people don't. But body cameras on the vest of a police officer, they're devices that as soon as a police officer has an interaction with someone, the camera would automatically begin recording the 5 seconds or 15 seconds before the encounter, and then would record the entire encounter. Okay? I know people are like, well, with Eric Garner, it was caught on videotape. You're right, it was caught on videotape. But here's what I'll say in addition to that. In addition to that, in the city of Rialto, which is here in California, law enforcement officers wore the body cameras and they tested it for a year. And so what research uncovered was that incidents of police use of force decreased. Police use of force decreased, and a force being used on the officer decreased. Okay? So when people are saying that, oh, this movement, it's against law enforcement officers. No, the camera is going to make the law enforcement officers safer as well. Okay? It seems like that's something that we would be for. Okay. So now we kind of want to we're a little early, transition into answering your questions. So if you've written something down, or you want to take about 5 minutes to write something down, or a couple minutes to write something down, if you hold it in the air, we'll have our aides to come around and collect the cards. You might want to ask Osnat about her social activism on campus. Yeah, we might have to. We can start. So we'll start with some, and then we can start with the others. Okay, maybe not. There's not that many. Okay, well, you guys, we'll start with these. I'm so happy that you guys have questions. Okay, that's a heavy one. Okay, this is good. Okay, so you still have time to write down your questions. So even as we're continuing to dialogue, feel free to write them down. You can even raise your hand. I just wanted to give you the option of being anonymous if you need it to be or want it to be. All right, so we're going to start. So the first one is, how do you think this has impacted persons of color on the police force? Yeah, awesome question. So, in many different ways. So, Of course, we know that people of color have varied beliefs, varied thoughts, and so they fall into many different categories. There's not just one category that folks are going to fall into. So you have some officers that feel like, let's keep going. What we're doing is good. I don't like this social movement stuff. These people are just, now I have to work longer hours. I'm being called in to work a double shift. I'm spending less time with my family because now I have to, provide law enforcement at these different protests and these different rallies, and it's just, a headache. So you have some people that feel that way. You have some other officers who feel like, I'm with it. So you've had some officers that have actually signed off on documents. You've had policing agencies and that have signed off on documents saying, I support this looking into police brutality, that there are incidents of police brutality that need to be addressed. So that's in the law enforcement sense. Personally, I'm sure it impacts them, personally. I spoke with an officer, I guess a month ago, about this very topic, and her stance was that she felt like, well, people are wondering why shot so many times. Well, the reason why is because we're taught to double tap. So when we're trained in our weapons, we're not trained to try to shoot somebody once. We're trained to double tap. So it's always going to be at least more than one shot. Also, we aim for the body mass area because this is the largest area. It's an easier target to hit. Trying to aim for somebody's leg, if you're not a good shot, which many, I don't know if I should say that on record. Let's just say people need train for shooting. No, I'll just say many law enforcement officers they're not snipers. Okay, can we agree on that? Is that safe? Okay, so trying to shoot a moving target and it's really small, it's difficult. And so this officer, that's how they felt, is that that's the reason why there's a person might get shot more than once. If my life is in danger, I'm trained to shoot. And anytime I pull my weapon, it is a shoot to kill. It's not a shoot to harm. That's just the way that we are trained. And then I asked that officer a question, and this was a person of color, female as well, and I said, yeah, but it seems to happen a lot to certain groups of people. And this particular officer has children, and then they said, yeah, and that's problematic. So even that officer was kind of, between and trying to figure things out on their own. Okay, so I think officers find their perspectives are as varied as ours are. Okay, good question, though. Thank you. Could you talk about the complicit relationship between the state and religion as forms of social and racial control? You want to? Yeah. I thought you were thinking about it. Okay. Okay. The question was, can you talk about the complicit relationship between the state and religion as forms of social and racial control? The state and religion. So by the state, I'm guessing you're meaning law enforcement, since that's what we're talking about today. Yes, historically, and again, even today, law enforcement, there are perspectives of people who feel that law enforcement officers, the laws, the way that people are policed, the laws against those policed, who gets caught up in that, that all of that is targeted towards specific racial groups. Statistically, it is interesting. I mean, that's what I can say. Statistically, it's interesting. When I look at law enforcement or arrest data, so that's data you can find it's the Uniform Crime Report, so UCR. So if anybody Googles UCR, the Uniform Crime Report, that's public information. You can look at arrest data broken down by race, so that's table 43 specific. I mean, I say this because people, when I tell you the statistics, people don't believe me. So they don't. When you look at that information, when you look at that data, so you have hundreds of thousands of policing agencies reporting to the FBI who they arrest, and they collect data on who they arrest. When you look at that data, 70% of those arrested are white. But when you look at the data on who's incarcerated, the numbers are much different. That is interesting. As a researcher, that's an interesting phenomenon. That's not something that I can ignore. Okay. Religion as a form of social control. I'm not sure if I can go there. I am a professor at Biola University. Nice to meet you. Yes.
I think I can speak to that.
Sure.
I'm a chapter organizer for Black Lives Matter in my hometown. My name's Brianna, by the way. So I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's talking about what the relationship is between the environments that we all exist in and evangelicals exist in and Christianity and the state, whether it be the media, whether it be law enforcement, police, campus police, so different forms of institutions that police, what the relationship is. And I think it goes back to even something that you were saying, the dividing of people who are being respectable, people who are being godly, people who are being nice, people who are organizing in a way that we think is acceptable, versus the people that we think are being ungodly, and the people that we think aren't being respectable, and they're not following whatever ways that you understand the Bible, and they're being, unchristian because they're attacking their writing. That is oppressive. That in and of itself is using a religious lens to dismiss people who are rightfully angry and who are not opportunistic. I think that's a very violent thing to call people who are writing opportunistic when you're thinking about the fact that they have a right to be angry, to be upset about the environment that they're in.
Yes.
And while there is people who are being opportunistic, because that will happen, it's mostly that there's people who are, they're showing in rage and they're showing in anger, and there's trauma, there's violence. That's the violence. People are they're reacting to the environment that they're in. So I feel like even in that, even in how you're talking, that is a way that religion and that Christianity is used to divide people and to perpetuate racism. You're being angry, you're not being godly, you're not talking about this in a way that I want to hear it. That's racism. That's being complicit with the state. That's being complicit with these institutions to put people down and to divide them into, if you don't talk about it the way I want you to, if you don't organize the way I want you to, then it's done. I was interviewed, and they were like, you folks are organizing very, very peacefully. And I was like, don't use me in the fact in the way how I'm organizing against other people who have felt the need to show a rage and show an anger. And I think the best way I would phrase it is, how would you react if your own child was killed, was murdered? Would you really tolerate someone telling you to be peaceful and to be calm, or would you be destroying everything in your sight? Just as a pure reaction. That's a real reaction to institutional violence. So I feel like we have to be really mindful of how religion is being used against people in that way, and I think that that's something we should be mindful of here, where do not be asking people to talk about things in a Christian way. That's violent. That's messed up.
Good. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Yes?
I just have another question. I don't know if you wanted to address that first.
Oh, yes. Does anyone else want to? I'm not gonna. I think she said enough. So yes.
I mean, I think just to go off that too, I think historically to not recognize the way in which Christianity has been used as a tool of social and racial control, whether that be the KKK or just normal churches historically, and not address that is to there's a blind spot in these conversations among Christians.
And even used to police black people, because there was a lot of states where black congregation could not meet with a white person present, without a white person present, because they were afraid of rioting.
And organizing.
So, yeah.
Good. Did I see another hand?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if anybody would like to learn more about this topic, there's a book by a guy named Walter Brueggemann, who wrote a book called The Prophetic Imagination. And he talks about how there's this thing called royal consciousness, which is all about maintaining the status quo, versus alternative consciousness, which is a lot more fluid and seeking to create positive change. And he writes about, I believe, he's a religious author, possibly Christian, I'm not sure. But he talks about how affluence, oppression, and then static religion are the three things that play into the royal consciousness of maintaining the status quo. If you want to see that unpacked more from an academic perspective, then searching Walter Brueggemann's The Prophetic Imagination would be a good place to start.
Good. Nice. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'll take your question.
Oh, thanks. I was just wondering, Dr. Collier, if with the LA Watts Police Department and the way that they've changed things over, I don't know if you're familiar with
LAPD?
that. LAPD in
Uh-huh.
Watts.
Okay.
I'm from Ohio and I watched a special on like Watts, and the way that basically the LAPD has changed to be more community policing.
Mm-hmm.
And with I don't know anything about so
No,
I'm sure
it's
you
fine,
guys
no.
know so much that I
Yeah.
don't know, but basically looking at the way that they have changed to be more involved in their community and actually get to know them. Police officers there's like a group of black police officers who are coaching a 7 to 8 year old football team to get to know people in the community, and it seemed to be I think it lowered crime like significantly. I don't know how much, but it was like 5 years ago that they started it. And I was just wondering, so I think there are really great creative ways that we can change the way that the police is interacting with communities by giving them like different tools that are like, I don't know, just creatively approaching it in a different way that helps both sides better understand one another, take down fear, take down mistrust. But like, how is just normal civilians that are not involved in law enforcement, can we encourage our local law enforcement to change the way that they're doing training, like beyond protesting, which is so important? Are there other things that you would recommend or ways that we can influence our local law enforcement?
Yeah, definitely. So first I want to say the community policing is like, it's not a new concept. Like, it's a concept that's been around for at least 10 years. Like, it's been around for quite some time. And the federal government actually funds research for community policing to help law enforcement agencies to take on that model, because some of our older models, broken windows theory, which is a part of what's being used, have been proven to be not helpful. So you do have some agencies that are utilizing community policing as a model. So I didn't mean to allude to like it is if it did not exist. LAPD is, the city of Los Angeles is just, it's huge. And so each division is almost like a different agency almost. And so you have different things going on within the LAPD, some great, some not so great. So yeah, I mean, that's all I'll say about that. So yes, there are many different things that people can do to encourage their local law enforcement agency to adopt more of a community policing stance. We're going to talk about some at the end, but I'll just say you can write to the chief, write to the person that's in charge. You can elect people that have the same mindset that you have, because those people are the ones that are going to state law enforcement policy, the policy that the law enforcement officers will follow. So I'll say those two, and then I'll save because we're gonna cover it at the end as well. Yes.
Kind of following up on that, do you think that the war on drugs makes it difficult for police departments to focus their resources on community policing?
I'm like, you guys would have a whole different lecture. Yes. Yeah. It is. No, yeah, I get you. It's a great question. So I don't mean it in terms of not being a good question. I feel like Asnat and I we're never sure how to prepare. So we kind of prepared for low bar, and then you guys are like, no, let's go here. So I'm like, okay, cool, let's go. Yeah, definitely. The war on drugs is like sucking our funds dry, like all over the nation. So not just in, certain areas, national dollars, so not just local law enforcement dollars. It's just not a good use of resources. There have been statistics, studies done, documentaries, books, etc. Like over and over and over again, we have proven that this is not a good way for us to spend our money. Not only because of the drain it is on law enforcement resources, but even on corrections resources, because now we are incarcerating and we are paying for people to be incarcerated over things that I would prefer not to pay for. So, you know, I want violent crime, violent criminals, people like that perhaps should be incarcerated. People who can't control themselves, you know, to stop killing people in mass, things like that. Those people should be behind bars. Those are people that my tax dollars, I don't have a problem paying for them to be behind bars. Somebody sold $10 worth of weed. So, but I'm saying this, and there might be some people in the room that have strong convictions and feel like where drugs are wrong and bad and et cetera. Okay, what I'm saying is that it costs us about $65,000, I believe, is the last time I looked the numbers up. $65,000 a year to incarcerate an individual in the state of California. $65,000 a year. Okay. $10 worth of weed, $65,000 a year.
Yeah, but I
Okay.
feel like that goes back again to how religiously, if we're talking about drugs and we're putting a moral or biblical price on drug usage and drug abuse, and we're saying it's morally wrong to be a drug user, we're justified in the war on drugs. So again, how does our spirituality perhaps feed into this racism so that it fuels the war on drugs, which is a classist, racist, ableist war that costs us money, and that is a perpetuation of this violence. Black Lives Matters also, it cares about, you know, incarceration and cares about prison reform and justice and prison abolition, because that's part and parcel to the oppression and to who is getting funneled into these systems and why.
Yes. If that is your motivation, then yes, then it does. For some people, it may not be their motivation. Their motivation might be that they had a crack addict aunt in their family, and so they might be morally against it because they saw the effects and the impacts on an actual life and on children beyond that. But you're absolutely right. If that is the reason, if you're holding up someone addicted to drugs and you think that that's different than you stealing a pen or whatever, whatever you might be holding that against, then yeah, I mean, I would probably challenge you to look at that. Look at that for yourself. I mean, Jesus says that no sin carries a greater weight. So, you know, and that's the way that I teach my students. I teach my students who want to be cops. That's usually who I'm with all day, is people who want to be cops. And what I tell them is, you have to be held to, you know, the people that you work for, but the same for the people that you're arresting. So that's, you know, you have to balance that out. All right, I think I saw a hand over here and over here. Shoot, and I have cards.
Yeah.
Okay. Sir.
So, I was afforded the special opportunity to go to Ferguson this past fall, about a week after.
To go where?
Ferguson.
Okay.
That was about a week after the non-indictment, and I still have trouble understanding why did they deem it necessary to make it a state of emergency. I saw armored Humvees, National Guards with open arms, M16s, and dozens of riot police in Ferguson, downtown Ferguson.
Yeah, yeah.
Why was it the state government's response so brutal in force?
It's a good question.
I think I'm asking, I know it's a big question. but,
Yeah.
Like if you could give me like a.
Sure. So people call for a state of emergency. It's oftentimes political. And so if I don't want to use my budget, so if I don't want to use Dr. Collier's wallet to pay for something, and I want to use the university's wallet to pay for something, then we'll call it a business meeting instead of hanging out with my friend. You see what I mean? So I didn't say I did that. I'm just saying, I was using it as an analogy. And so sometimes that's what happens with local law enforcement. If they don't want to pay for the policing, the extra hours or the gear or et cetera, then they might say, let's call for a state of emergency, because that's going to come out of a different pocket of money. So that's one thing. But I don't want to ignore that there's a lot of racial tension in that area. I mean, not saying that there's not racial tension everywhere, but specifically in that area, the federal government is actually now investigating law enforcement and the law enforcement agency in that area. So it could definitely be motivated by they wanted to step up the use of force, and so let's call for a state of emergency because now we can treat it as a riot. Okay. Hopefully that answers.
We have
Okay.
a good theme of questions here. Like similar.
Oh, there's a theme.
Yeah.
There's a theme. Thank
Yeah.
you. Do you want to look through those?
Sure.
Okay.
No, not these two. But these ones, they're all talking about
These ones?
what
Okay.
institutions. And
How do you start racial social activism on a predominantly white institution? How do you get white students involved? Ooh, good question. Do you want to talk to that one? Speak to that one?
sure. Yes. Yeah. Okay. And then wait, I was gonna look at this one too.
Yeah, this one. Take that one. That one's for you. This
Okay.
one.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah, so how do you start racial social activism on a predominantly white institution? Hey, I go to Biola. So, falls under this category. Yeah, the way it worked, luckily we have social media, right? So that's like probably the best way. We see a lot of movement starting by social media. And that's the way it started, when we started it, is starting a Facebook message, right? And then making a status. Anybody who this is like bothering them, let's get together, let's think of brainstorm ideas how to act. And yeah, which led to the first group meeting with publicly in the middle of our campus. And I think you just need, well, talking to, we have a multi-ethnic programs, and they got involved, and then they informed other staff and administrators and faculty who are also supportive, which is a big ally in that. And like, as students, you feel like you're trying to go to class, trying to do your homework, right? And then you're thinking in class, how come it's not being addressed? Like, we pray in classes at private Christian schools, and how come that's not being addressed about against injustice? And so at that time, I saw faculty and like my professors and people I know being there, which was a great start. Was like, okay, I know people care, people are thinking about this, and there were like white faculty there as well, which I think other white students could see as an example, and like that white allies are important in this. And then it's going to like the next events. Well, yeah, that was the first event, and also so I think calling your administrators and like talking to them. So our president of the university found out and wanted to be there and make a point to be there, which I think just putting that pressure onto administrators, being like, this is something important, like nationally, and then especially as Christians, like this is like what I expect and like what I think should be happening. Yeah, and so that continued twice. We did another student-led one, another student organized it, and yeah, just standing in front in the middle of our campus with signs saying Black Lives Matter, and like wearing that on our shirts all day in our classes, raising our hands saying like, oh yeah, I have a prayer request. Something's been happening in the news, can we pray? like yeah, like can we please pray? And like not pray for rioters to calm down, not pray for that, pray for against injustice, pray like because we know as Christians especially, it's like a war, not flesh and blood, there's a spiritual battle as well. And yeah, so just involving that. And then faculty kind of led and like asked us as student leaders to like help them lead the third one, which is like one of the bigger ones, where there was actually like a vigil set up. There was a cross, and with faculty you get money involved, so they can like buy stuff. So we had, instead of us being there presently in the space and then leaving after our time, they were able to like get a cross and print pictures and laminate them and get candles and make it a vigil that will remain when we're gone, so that other students who maybe weren't able to attend could see that and be like, okay, people are grieving, like I'm not alone, I'm not walking around, and people are still like Instagramming their lattes, and like I'm in pain, and like no one cares. So that was there, and then we painted the signs, different various signs. I had a list of them actually. We had ideas. We had ideas. We're like, okay, so let's think of good signs we should write. What other protesters are writing, and so, for example, we had okay. Some ideas at first were like, the system is not broken, it was made this way. Or like post-racial America, question mark. Another one, like pro-black isn't anti-white, it's anti-white supremacy, which is an ideal. Like people think this is not against white people at all. When you're saying, I care for this group that's being marginalized, that's not saying the outside group is at fault. It's saying there's a system in play. But we rejected those ones, even though many of us were who felt this way. We decided to go with more mild signs. So they said, Black Lives Matter, hands up, don't shoot, Evangelicals for justice, I can't breathe, and then pray for justice, pray for peace, pray for reconciliation. We thought, this is probably the most PC way we can do this. We put them up. That night, they were stolen. Everything was stolen. The pictures on the cross were taken down, and they were taken. We worked again during finals week, painted new signs, put them up, they were stolen again, and then painted again, and then they were stolen. So 3 times, and yeah. So in that case, at the end of it, we were just really tired and just didn't want to talk about it. But there were 2 white faculty members who put their email addresses up there saying, like, if you guys want to talk, whoever you guys are, like, email us. And then with that as at a white institution, they talked with them, and then it's like, I feel like they were able to listen because they were white. And with that, that's why a few people asked, like, as a white student, how can white students get involved? I feel like in that time, a lot of people of color, and white people included, were grieving and hurt, and didn't even have the energy to muster to, like, give you reasons why we were hurt. So in that time, for those white students who understand, what was, like, most helpful were people stepping up and explaining situations, and also fighting and, like, being present, not silent, like, acknowledging that they are an ally. So I think that's how white students can get involved. And yeah.
I'll answer that one too.
Okay. So this question is, at our institution, we had a silent protest with signs that said Black Lives Matter. One student came up to us and said he felt offended because he felt singled out. Wait, one black student. Okay. As a white student, how do I explain why the hashtag Black Lives Matter is important? That's difficult. I feel like, in this case, as a white student, talking to a black student, I feel like, okay, I'm gonna, like, briefly answer, and then okay, I was gonna say, in those cases, I think it's best not to try to correct someone of color and how they're feeling. You don't know, everyone copes in their own way, and their feelings are valid, and it's not for someone to correct them. That's what I think.
Yeah, good answer.
I actually think that question is referring to a white person who came up to.
No, it was a black student.
It was a
Came
black.
up to us
Oh, okay.
and said
Never
he
mind.
felt offended by
Never
it.
mind. I'm gone somewhere else.
Okay, yeah. Does anyone else have an answer you want to say to that? No. Okay. Do you think
I agree with you.
Yeah, you agree? Okay, thanks.
So I go to a specific university, and I've been a part of this movement on campus called Activate. And so I think what I've noticed in my last 3.5 years at Azusa is that when issues of race do get brought up, it's a conversation, and, like, it doesn't really move past conversation. And not in complete settings, because we have a Student Center for Reconciliation and Diversity, and that office does a lot. But I feel like the office shouldn't have as much pressure as it has to change things on campus, and that office should have more support, and that they shouldn't be the only ones working. And so students came together and dreamed, and we thought about ways that we can, like, kind of disrupt the institution and, like, get attention, other than, like, holding signs and stuff. And I think a lot of it came from, like, last semester. We have something called the Door of Discussion, and we put pictures of black men that have been killed with their last words, and we put, like, you're still alive, you still can think of your last words, like, what would they be? And someone threw, like, a drink on it. And so we had a student paint a new one, and we put that in our office so that it wouldn't get destroyed. And then the poster disappeared, I don't know where it went. And so I think that and a lot of other reasons, like, students wanted to become part of this group. And so what we did was we had a speak out where we organized it but not under the institution, and we just spoke out about different issues on campus or in the world. And then we had a walk out of chapel where it was like 75 students just left chapel. And so we're getting negative and positive feedback, not saying that we're doing everything perfect in this movement, but it feels as though that's the only way you can really get people's attention. Like, I can hold a sign, I could make a painting, I could do something, and people are gonna keep going about their days. And so I guess I would ask, like, the negative feedback we're getting is, like, for instance, for Activate, we had an info meeting the night before, what's the last name? Wednesday. We had an info meeting, and I think white students are having a really difficult time, and so there's a deactivate on campus, and there were students yelling in front of the door of discussion like, oh, like, we're gonna have smoothies here at 7 o'clock, but only white students can get them for free. And so I guess, like, how would you say, we go to different universities, I love, as you said, I love it, I'm serious. I'm serious, I do. Not for face. I'm just asking, like, how do you have these conversations and make sure, how do you connect the two? Like, I don't really know, like, how do you connect students of color who are frustrated, and there's some who are not, and who also don't like the movement, but how do you connect students of color who are frustrated and tired and don't want to have to keep explaining themselves over and over and over, and white students who are like, I don't know what you're talking about, and you're offending me, like, especially in a Christian environment, I don't know how to connect it, and I'm not sure what that looks like. I don't know if you have advice, but just wondering.
I know that's really difficult. I feel like what I've seen, like, because Lord Valen, like, people need to reflect on their own identities. Like, what does it mean to be like a white student or a white female, a white male on this campus? What does it mean to be like a black female on this campus? Like, if you're, I feel like posing it that way, like, hey, let's all explore our identities. You know, like, we need to understand why, like, what our words mean in the classroom when we're speaking. Like our different privileges. Exploring that might be helpful to make even the playing field. But yeah, I feel like that disconnect is going to be there, unfortunately, and a lot of times sharing like like Jesus, like the example of what Jesus, what did he went to the marginalized, he like listened, and it was countercultural, and like calling people to do that is like the best effort, but a lot of times people are going to hold on to, you know, not wanting to listen. I don't know.
Do you guys have statements to this, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Hopefully this isn't going against what anyone would encourage, but I think for me, and if you guys can speak to this, at some point, I do think you have to look at what Jesus says about throwing pearls before swine. Like, at some point, there are people who are willfully ignorant, who are intentional about their unwillingness to understand. And I think that, and that's on both sides, whether they be students of color or white students, majority, minority, whatever language you use. And I think that if there's a call, I think doing this type of ministry on a campus that like Biola, for example, or like Cedar where I'm from, or wherever, is a calling that God puts on your heart. And if you're called to that, you have to go where God is leading you. And sometimes you can't allow people who are willfully ignorant or intentionally ignorant to distract you from what you're being called to do. And so, I'm not saying that you just give up on people immediately, because it's easy to do that and just kind of, reverse segregate. But I think there is a reality of establishing when a person is just refusing to hear the truth. And you just have to realize that you're casting pearls before swine. There are others that need to hear. And you clean up the smoothie off the wall, and you go on with the mission that you were called to do. So
Yeah. Very nice. Yeah, I agree. I was actually thinking something similar. So the only thing that I will add to the discussion is also push for your administration to make a diversity class or some type of diversity requirement in your curriculum. You can, at Christian colleges, the board is really like powerful, and students have the loudest voice. So get a note card. It doesn't have to be a long letter. It doesn't have to be, all of that. Just get a little note card, and you can send letters to the board just pushing for that. Part of it is education that needs to occur for certain people. Certain people, they're not going to get it, so you shake the dust from your feet. I mean, you've done what you can. But part of it is that you need to have some type of structured, organized dialogue, educating people about power and privilege, and marginalization and oppression. So that's not something that's necessarily going to happen in a 5-minute phone, meeting in the CAF. Okay. So I want to get your question, and I want to answer the rest of it because you've been waiting for a long time.
No, that's okay. I just, in my own journey into figuring this out as a white person, some of the most powerful ways that I learned the importance of racial reconciliation was other white people telling me that this was important. And I was not as open to hearing this from people of color when I was in undergraduate school and graduate school. used all the same stereotypes that a lot of white folks use. You know, that's just an angry person of color. And it took some really strong white men and women who said, this is really important. So on your campuses, do you have white allies that can stand up alongside you? Not to push your agenda for you, but to say, I believe in this as much as these folks do, and I'm white, and I'm on this journey. So I think that's really key, is to find white allies that are willing to step alongside you. In my opinion.
I mean, and if you're white and you're in this room and you're asking the question about what can I do, anything is usually the answer that I say. I mean, and I say that jokingly, but it's because it's you actually speaking out, being willing to act, being willing to go out there. Not that I need you to save me, because that's a different issue. So that's not what I'm asking for at all. What I'm asking you to do is to speak to other white people about this journey. Oh my goodness, so many hands. Let me try to run through a couple of these really quick, and then I'll get some hands. So this one says, should protest / the movement look differently on a predominantly white, I'm guessing campuses? I think that the way that the protest or the movement looks, I think it depends on the personality of your campus. More so than it being a predominantly white campus or not. I think that, many predominantly white campuses have many different protests that happen in many different ways. So I think it really just goes back to the personality of the campus, more so than it being a predominantly white campus, I'm guessing, as opposed to an HBCU is what I'm guessing, or Hispanic serving institution. How do we address this issue to other Christians? I never want to be silent, but I also work at a church, and some people view me as divisive when I talk about this issue. And this goes back to what I was saying about educating people about power and privilege and oppression and marginalization. So, when people are privileged, you don't want to give that privilege up. And so any hint or any poke in the direction of that, a person is going to get defensive and think that you're divisive. What I'll say is what I do, because I think I work in a similar environment. I pray about it, and then I respond and react that way. Sometimes that means hitting middle ground. So sometimes, and this actually happened during all of this, some of my colleagues that are criminologists were like, you're going too soft. You're not going hardcore enough for me. You're not, we need you more to the left. And my response was just like, well, the personality of the campus that I'm at, I actually do want to impact change, and this is the way that I have to do it. So I'm stealthy. That's what I'll say. Was the All Lives Matter hashtag created in opposition to the Black Lives Matter hashtag? I believe so. And the reason why I'll say that, I don't think that people were like, sitting at home thinking, how can I come and oppose Black Lives Matter? I don't think, they were doing that. But what I think happens is that oftentimes we oppose people in a very passive-aggressive manner. And I feel like passive-aggressively, it was opposition. It was really weird because I was, there was a tweet that went around that said, do you go to funerals and say, I have grief too? And that's kind of how I felt. I was like, it's kind of redundant and silly to me. All lives matter. Okay, I'm glad you believe that. Right now, we're going to talk about the Black ones. Is that cool? So yes, to answer that question, how do you, sorry, I'm trying to make it happen so we can get some of the other questions. How do you handle conversations with family or people who are hostile to Black Lives Matter? You want to try, or you want me to? You don't have to. Okay. Okay, so very carefully. Here's what I'll say is that sometimes one of my colleagues, Dr. Brad Christensen, when we had our panel here at Biola, he's a white male faculty member, if you don't know him, and what he said, which I really appreciated, was that he said, his white friends, when all of this was happening, his white friends were very heady with it, very cerebral with it. They wanted to know like the location of the gun. Did Mike Brown really go for the officer's gun? And what was the trajectory of the bullets? And what was the position? They wanted to know that kind of information. And then he said that some of his black friends were feeling it here in the heart because they were thinking, you know, that could have been my brother. That could have been my father. It could have been my husband. It could have been my boyfriend. It could have been my neighbor. It could have been me. And so the conversations are happening on two different levels. And so that might be a starting point, is to kind of explain that to the person, that we're having a conversation at two different levels. So you want me to get like super technical with you when I'm not there right now. I'm in grief right now. Like I'm hurting, I'm in pain, and this is where I am. Or explain wherever your position is. So that might be a starting place. Another thing that I do is I'll talk about things that people do understand, you know. So I tell them, I had a panic attack on campus. Someone who I was very close with passed away. This happened about a year ago. And I was on campus, had a panic attack. My colleagues had to like rescue me. And but the thing is, if you've ever had a panic attack, it's a really scary feeling, right? Like you think you're gonna die because you can't seem to catch your breath. Like you really are doing that, right? Like you're just thinking and you're concentrating and you're thinking, if I could just catch my breath, then I can make it. But if I don't catch my breath, then I'm gonna die and I don't know what to do. And then that's making you freak out more. So it's making you more, right? So that's how I feel. That's how I felt when Mike Brown was murdered. That's how I felt when Eric Garner was murdered. That's how I felt when, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now I've used something totally different that many people can relate to explain how I feel. Okay, so you might want to practice some of those things. How do we raise these topics without feeling like we're pointing the blame, such as calling all white people racist or all officers racist? So I would say, don't call all white people racist, and don't call all officers racist. That would pretty much be it. I mean, I don't feel guilty about raising the topic. I don't feel guilty about talking about it because I don't call all white people racist and I don't call all officers racist. Now, there might be some people that are at a different place in their white identity development where they might feel offended and attacked by anything I say. That really has nothing to do with me. That really has more to do with them. So you should not allow that to silence you. This movement, although meant for 100% good, I approve of this. As a white male, I feel this movement ostracizes and outcasts me for being white. Is there an actual issue with this? And how can we let the white voice be heard without it sounding racist or against other races and people of color? So I think this one is pretty interesting to me because this particular movement is actually one of the things that is astounding sociologists, not astounding, but fascinating sociologists, is that this is a very multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational movement. So this is not a black movement. When you actually, I remember when things were happening over Thanksgiving break and I'm at with my mom and we're watching TV and they're showing how there were some people feeding the protesters, baking dinner for them and everything, Thanksgiving dinner. And then they showed like this choir and it was like an all white choir and it was like singing gospel music, singing their hearts out. So it's not, it's not a black movement. It really is actually multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multi-generational. If you are feeling pretty offended, what I would say is that we might need to start walking with somebody down the path of racial identity development so that you can start confronting your privilege a little bit so that you don't feel as offended just because somebody else is standing up for something they believe in. So just because I stand up for something I believe in, it doesn't mean that it's against anybody else. All right. Almost there.
Similar about white students.
These are similar? Oh, how can I as a white person discuss with other white people who don't think racism exists, that they think that police are always good, black people are in the wrong? I kind of feel like we've answered that with some of the other questions. Why aren't examples of white vandalism shown by the media? Oh, yes. Excellent. Excellent. Actually meant to bring this up. So it goes back to what I was saying about the media. They are a consumer-run, agency, and they pump propaganda. If you didn't know that, welcome. Either welcome or you are welcome, however you want to. But that is reality. And so there are only certain images that are kind of blast out there and put out there that kind of support this thought process that people of color are savage and angry and hostile and et cetera. And that has a very long racist history, those words, those thoughts, those images, and those ways of describing people of color. You can Google it. There are many different white folks that have rioted and burned down police cars over basketball games, over like a chicken run or something like that, over football, like my team won, let's riot, my team lost, let's riot, so. Yes. All right. I think we've answered all of the cards.
Is there more about at the end? We can answer these.
Okay, there's 2 more that we're going to answer at the end because I think they're asking for strategies. Okay. I'll come back, but let me try to get some other people that haven't spoken. I think you had your hand up for a while. Yes.
So just listening to the stories about how signs were ripped down and things were stolen, I was just very angry and deeply saddened that would happen on this campus. But I think what hit me stronger was the fact that I didn't hear anything about it until today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why is no one talking about this on campus? Like, where are the groups at? I read a story about Yik Yak, but I didn't hear anything about this.
Yeah, that was. Wait.
Yeah, you can.
Oh, yeah, that was what was disappointing to me. And then I knew that it did fall under the last paper had been published for this semester, because the end of the semester before then. But yeah, the news really didn't go far. I think now there's an article this week out on it. But yeah, a lot wasn't addressed, and even the consequences weren't really addressed. And it was just very disappointing. And we were actually cautioned before when we started. We had to state our case to different departments and had to kind of consult departments saying this is something that needs to be addressed. We need to put signs up and getting permission. And in the permission process, they were asked they didn't trust us, me and another friend who was black. And then we had a white faculty member, and they're like, okay, I'm glad. They literally said, okay, we're glad you're here because now we think this is okay. Mm-hmm. And it was really crazy. And then they told us, what if the signs get stolen? It'd look bad on our campus. Maybe you guys shouldn't put the signs up. And we said, good, if it happens, I'm sorry, but then that's the truth of what happens. And we need to address why this happens. And I don't think it reflects everybody. I don't think everyone would do that. And but it needs to be why did this happen? And so. Yeah.
But it just also speaks to privilege and oppression and marginalization. So some things are very important to our campus and some things not so much. Mm-hmm. So those are things to raise with your administration, with your student leadership. Those are things to raise.
It was covered on Biola Torch, but no one listens to the Torch. So they were covered in
the radio station, yeah.
They did. She covered
They did, yeah.
interviewed people, but nobody listened. So unless you are really in tune to the campus all the time, these types of things just fly under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even in that being covered, we were interviewed, but we were so tired, and it was finals week, and I sacrificed class time, and that's what made me realize about protesters. It's not for fun. People go do it. We were tired, we were behind in homework, we missed class, we were crying, and had to pull it together and explain to people. And then, so I'm thinking, protesters are missing work. They're away from their families. They're tired. They're cold. They're hungry. They're weak. So I was just thinking about that and how they were being portrayed and how defeating that would be. We're working so hard and we're being portrayed as violent and angry. Yeah. So.
Okay, maybe 2 more questions. I think somebody over here. Sir, I think you've had your hand up for a while.
I was just going to suggest a solution to the question that was posed of how do we get more white students involved in protests like Black Lives Matter? Mm-hmm. I think, as a white student, I feel when I see a group that is strictly black students going around with the protest of Black Lives Matter, I feel like, you know, in a way, although it's not what's intended, I feel like I don't belong there. I feel like it's just a rally of black students. And so if you were to have that kind of rally, but get some of your white friends to show up just to support you, that will give the image of it's all inclusive, anybody is welcome, anyone can show up.
Okay. Let him finish, let him
Although
finish.
it's not putting the blame on somebody, it's to present the image that it is for everybody.
Okay. Hang on. Let me. hang on. Let me, Jermaine. Let me have you respond, and then Zeta.
So what I was just gonna say, I'm taking a class here, and it's in the it's called like the N-word and cultural appropriation, all that. But in class we talk about the story of Nat Turner and how the Confessions of Nat Turner is not written by a black guy, but is actually written by this other white dude. And so it's kind of, in history, there's always been this, okay, black people have something to say, but we're going to have this white person be there to justify that. And that's kind of, when you were saying that, yes, I get what you're saying, but it's kind of like, do we always need this white face just to make everybody feel good? Or do we need to understand that other people do have something to say, and we don't need this constant justification or, oh no, it's okay, they're here, they're with me, kind of thing.
Zeta, were you gonna say something else?
Yeah, so similar to that. But yeah, and similar to that too, just that feeling of being uncomfortable, right? That's something that students of color on white campuses deal with every single day, right? So when you feel that intimidation, and we don't have people to come and validate who we are to other people to say, oh, okay, now this person gets a pass, right? A lot of times it's almost like scratching and fighting our way in, you know, or trying to make ourselves seem a little bit more accommodating until you just get tired and just like, whatever, I'm gonna kind of just isolate myself because I'm tired of having to like kind of jump through these hoops. So, but in that same way where us as people of color and really just as human beings, we have to kind of like press through our barriers of fear and intimidation. Like white students too, like you have to do that, you know, it's just a part of life. And I don't think maybe white students get that message as often. We have to get it all the time. White students don't, so I would just encourage you guys to press through that, you know. That's something that Christ encourages to do, you know. I become all things to all people that I might win them to Christ, right? So step out of your comfort zone and go into that and explore that feeling, you know. That's what I would say. I would just encourage you to do that.
Okay, for sake of time,
I just have one question for him. Why don't you be that white friend?
Okay. Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So that's what I was going to say is that the reason why that it may have been highlighted to you is that God might be saying to you that you need to be that person. So when you see them, even though it is uncomfortable, maybe you need to be the one to go and march with them and walk with them and hold up a sign with them. Oftentimes, God calls us to do things that are uncomfortable. We can't run from that, you know. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. Students of color feel uncomfortable all the time, you know. They feel uncomfortable just sitting in class taking a test, you know. So yeah, I just want to encourage you to don't be afraid to embrace that. Get some of your friends too, and like let's all go out there and support this. So we're gonna have time for one last question. So difference, not responding to that. That time's done. One last question. I'm going to try to give an opportunity to someone who has not spoken. Oh, goodness gracious, there's 3. So let's, okay, I saw this gentleman here in the.
I can ask you personally afterwards.
Okay, you want to ask me personally?
I put the card up it and I'll ask afterwards.
Okay. In this gentleman standing up, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's more of a comment than a question. Is it okay if I say comment?
Sure.
To my fellow APU lover in the front row. I'm an APU alum. I'm not there now. But as an administrator at a Christian college, I'm at Westmont College now, I think it's important for us, the reality is that students of color experience microaggressions every day. We've talked about that. experience all sorts of things, and sometimes it can be difficult to know how much to bear that on your own and how much to kind of bring forward things that happen. And I guess I would just encourage, some of the things that I heard you describe that happen are just totally inappropriate and illegal, actually. And so I think that from my perspective as a white administrator, I hope, or as an administrator, just as an administrator, that that's on the radar too for students. Some of the students feel like, I'm just kind of have to do this on my own, I have to figure out how to go through this, but there hopefully are staff at your institutions that not only are required to by law, but want to stand there with you and seek justice for the kinds of things that are happening, because our institutions are for everybody, not just for some.
Yeah, good note. That was a great comment to end on. Yeah, and I just want to encourage students, you do what you can. Organize. Your voice is the loudest, especially at CCCU institution, at private Christian colleges. Like, your voice is the loudest, literally. So when you go silent, you're giving up your own power. So don't be afraid. It's like I said, and it doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be a meeting if that's too much for you. Just write it out on a note card and send it in campus mail, but get your voice heard. So we want to talk about quickly the Christian responses to the movement, because this sums up the last two questions, and I'm asked this a lot. Here's what I'll say. First, listen. So these are not going to apply to everybody, but if there's one that applies to you, awesome. Listen. This moment calls God's people to action, but action should start by listening. Choose to be with people who do not share your own ethnic background and listen to their stories and the pain. Resist defensiveness or denial, rescue, or tidying it all up. Keep listening, especially to stories of those whose race or ethnicity is not your own. Love starts here. That was actually by Fuller Theological Seminary's president, wrote these first three. Pray. Find someone in the body of Christ to pray with about what you are hearing. Bringing God's passionate concern for love and justice into these matters is critically important and reminds us that the just, forgiving, loving power of God can make a difference. Call upon the God who seeks justice and calls us all to it as well. Read. Much has been written on subjects related to race that is worth reading. To start, I have found valuable Divided by Faith, Evangelical Religion and the Problem of Race in America by Christian Smith and Michael Emerson, Divided by Faith. The next one, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. So that will explain lots of things for you, specifically about the criminal justice system. And that's called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And then the third one, Race, a Theological Account. And that's by J. Cameron Carter. Okay, those first three were actually written in a statement that was sent out by Fuller Theological Seminary's president, Dr. Mark LeBurton. I'm a Fuller alumna, so I liked those three. The next three are ones that I added to his statement. Serve. When you receive notification for jury duty, serve. So that's a small, minute point, but we often miss it. When we get jury duty, we want to run from it. We don't want to do it. And then we get really upset when these juries turn out in indictments or non-indictments, things that we don't agree with. So serve. Act. Most social movements are pushed forward by students. So historically, when you look at social movements, they were moved on the backs of students. So you are the ones. You are the age group. So you can be the answer to the injustice that you see in the world. So don't be afraid to act. And then lastly, apply. If you are unhappy with ethical decision-making of law enforcement officers, maybe you should become one and work to have a more ethical law enforcement force. Maybe you don't want to be an officer. Maybe you want to work in a different capacity, but that is something to think about. We just want to thank you for coming to our session, taking our time. We have fun. We will stay up here for a while if you would like to interact with us or chat with us. Our contact information is on the screen if you want to email either myself or Asnat. You have evaluations that you need to complete, so if you can take the last 5 minutes to complete your evaluations. and our helpers will pick them up.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.